Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you for downloading another episode of the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast, our 12th edition. Took a week off kind of for the holidays, got everything in order, had some fun prepping for the Quick Lane Bowl coverage that Kenny and I did, and now I'm back with the 12th edition of the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast, where we rank the top 5 stories in the world of Detroit sports. And this week was an up and down week. Lots going on, lots to get to, lots to opine about. As always, thanks to the producer, Kenny Frenzel. Although this week, he did not reply to the text message. I got to check in on him, make sure he's okay. I bet he's probably still in shock over the events that took place with Michigan State. I mean, it was a tough loss on New Year's Eve. We had a fun week at the podcast. Lots of great news and notes, things that occurred that helped the podcast progress forward. Real quickly, just want to thank everybody that downloads this podcast, downloads all the shows on the network. Want to thank our sponsors, Team Top Cat Sales, Fanatic U, the Detroit Beard Collective. Without the support of our sponsors, we couldn't continue to grow and put out these great podcasts each and every week, and we greatly appreciate all the sponsors. Before we begin the top 5 countdown list, we do what we call the Kenny Frenzel Honorable Mentions, and that's where we just kind of talk about some stories that are outside the top 5, but are worthy to include in this podcast because they did make some news and notes in the world of Detroit sports. Wasn't a great week overall for Michigan State University. Tom Izzo lost his dad on Monday. His dad passed away at 90 years old. It was a tough week for Michigan State, the basketball program. They went out then and played Iowa without their star basketball player Denzel Valentine, and they put in really a lackluster effort, and they were defeated. They rebounded nicely, though, and toughed out a win versus Minnesota. And it was a very nice gesture by Denzel Valentine to present the game ball to Tom Izzo, who obviously is having a tough week with the passing of his father, and it really shows the tight-knit group that is the Michigan State basketball team. Denzel Valentine's a star player. He's there cheering on the team. Hopefully he's going to come back in the next week or two after that knee surgery. He's a guy that's going to be missed, and it's going to be tough for Michigan State without him. They did play good versus Minnesota, and it was a very nice game. It was a gritty game, and it was one that they toughed out, but you can see the difference between the Michigan State team with Denzel Valentine and the team without him. So the first honorable mention goes to Tom Izzo and the Michigan State basketball team, who had a solid week, 1-1, didn't play all that great versus Iowa, but rebounded nicely versus Minnesota. And finally, the last Kenny Frenzel honorable mention goes to the University of Michigan, who are making some news and notes on the recruiting trail, and they're continuing to make some waves in that there are some recruits that are potentially going to flip and join the University of Michigan. It's very interesting if you read between the lines. If you're interested in recruiting, you can kind of see that, there are these guys that develop relationships at these camps. There are these teammates that want to play college ball together. And so Michigan, coming off of that great win, and if you stay tuned on this podcast, they probably will make the top 5 list at some point. But these athletes want to play together, and if Michigan's able to, not only, the recruiting class that they brought in is ranked fairly solidly according to everybody, but if they're able to flip others as well, that's going to be interesting to see come the January 9th. This thing opens up again, and people are now starting to sign their letters of intent and getting this thing more formalized. But Michigan's recruiting is very solid, and if they're able to flip several other players and bring them in that are highly ranked, that's what you're going to need to continue to have success at Michigan. And we all saw it in the national semifinal game with Michigan State and Alabama. Alabama has 60 5-star recruits. That when I saw that number, my jaw hit the floor. I mean, that number is utterly staggering, and Jim Harbaugh is working on that approach in terms of bringing in 4- and 5-star guys. And if you can bring in talented individuals, then that just is going to set you up for success. So the honorable mentions this week are Tom Izzo and the Michigan State basketball program and the Michigan college football program, potentially adding new recruits that are going to be flipped from other programs. All right, let's get into this countdown podcast. The number 5 story this week in the world of Detroit sports is Peter Mrazek has slowly but surely inched his way up to probably become the starting goaltender for the Detroit Red Wings. Jimmy Howard, by all accounts, is in a slump. His last 2 starts, he was pulled, and Peter Mrazek now has played in 7 consecutive games, 2 games where Howard was pulled, and 5 consecutive starts. And what you see when Peter Mrazek's in net is, markedly different than Jimmy Howard. Peter Mrazek has the it factor, and he's a guy that the Red Wings play slightly better in front of. And it's just a matter of time before you start to see that Peter Mrazek is the guy that's going to play the boatload of these games. Now, it's not to say that you don't need a guy like Jimmy Howard. I'm one that said maybe you could think about trading him, but you're just one play away, one rush away from Peter Mrazek maybe getting hurt, and it would behoove the Red Wings to consider keeping Jimmy Howard this season and maintain him as the backup. He hasn't played all that great. He'll tell you that. He'll tell you that he's working as hard as he can to get back to the form that we're all used to seeing Jimmy Howard play at. But right now, he's not playing that good, and he's hurting the team. And Peter Mrazek is the best starting goaltender for the Detroit Red Wings. So I do believe once the competition shakes out, that everybody in the organization will see, including head coach Blashill, that you have to start Peter Mrazek. That's the guy. That's the guy you want game in, game out to, be the goaltender for the Red Wings. He's got the calm and cool demeanor. He can handle, situations where, if the defense is a little bit lax and they're giving up maybe 30, 35 shots, he can stop the majority of them that he sees. And so as long as the defense plays stellar in front of him, then you have a solid chance. And so the Red Wings, I believe, should announce Peter Mrazek as being the starting goaltender relatively quickly. But, at this point in time, Blashill is continuing to want to platoon them. But if Jimmy Howard continues to struggle and he stays, slumping, then it'll make the decision that much easier. But I do believe that Peter Mrazek is an up-and-coming young goaltender that has the capability of being a star in this league. With that, all you can say is that Peter Mrazek is slightly more talented than Jimmy Howard. But, those that want to maybe trade Jimmy Howard, maybe pump the brakes, consider the fact that situations in a season, may dictate that Jimmy Howard may get some more playing time down the line. Maybe you want to rest Peter Mrazek ahead of the playoff push, should the Red Wings be lucky enough to earn that 25th straight year getting back to the playoffs. So, I think Jimmy Howard is a solid goaltender. I know his contract doesn't dictate that you would keep him at that position, that you may look to upgrade the squad by trading the likes of Jimmy Howard, but I truly believe that for this season, for the 2015-2016 season, you want to keep Jimmy Howard and Peter Mrazek, a solid goaltending core for the Red Wings, and one that can definitely, they can both push each other. They can both, if called upon, go in there and help the Red Wings should they make a playoff push. So the number 5 story this week in the world of Detroit sports is the Detroit Red Wings and Peter Mrazek slightly increasing his chances of becoming the starting goaltender for your Detroit Red Wings. All right, the number 4 story this week. My goodness, shades of the past with the Pistons versus the Pacers. If you watched the game on Saturday night, you were treated to an interesting slugfest. One, Pistons mightily struggled to play. When Adam and I kind of talked about the Pistons and we previewed them, we talked about when they're going to struggle, when there are games where they're not going to play that well, are going to be games like we saw on Saturday night where they just, have a hard time putting the biscuit in the basket. Shots weren't falling. The shot selection wasn't all that great. And it was just one of those games where the refs weren't calling it properly. There were several calls that went against the Pistons. And Stan Van Gundy is a guy who is not afraid to stand up to his team. He took 2 technical fouls late in the game, got ejected, gave the refs a few choice words, and it was deserved. I mean, the calls, even though the game was at Indiana, the calls weren't, you just want a fair game. You want the game to be called fairly, and it just wasn't. And in those situations, SVG is a guy that will stand up for his team. But in the end, the Pistons did not play well versus the Pacers. Marquise Morris handled his business, pushing and shoving at the end of the game. Now, it wasn't anywhere near the level of excitement as the brawl, the malice at the Palace 10 years ago, but it was a little bit exciting and maybe a little bit of a divisional rivalry developing with the Pacers. And you can see that both these teams play hard and are both up-and-coming teams. Paul George is recovering nicely from his injuries, and he is a budding superstar. And you could see that when the game got close, he was the go-to guy and the Pistons really didn't have a significant answer for Paul George. But Marcus Morris was continuing to stand up for the Pistons, and there was pushing and shoving. He wasn't going to take no gruff from anybody, and you like to see that. You like to see a team, because in years past, the Pistons were, kind of, when you talked about them, they were known for kind of maybe giving up, not putting forth the significant effort, for being guys that were just kind of maybe there to pick up a paycheck and weren't willing to, hit the floor and handle their business. But this team is a young team that's gelling together, and they're playing a solid brand of basketball. They could be more consistent. They could definitely, there are nights when their shot just isn't falling, and I believe they were well under 40% versus the Pacers, and it was just a tough watch because they were getting shots, but they just weren't falling. And so for the Pistons, you really kind of going forward have to really look to maybe improve the squad a little bit, because the East is decent at this point in time, but it's not a situation where you can afford to lose these kind of games going forward. It's not like, you can play a brand of basketball that is lazy, or that you can play a brand of basketball that's inconsistent. You're going to have to, really make your shots, play a solid brand of defense in this East if you want to make the playoffs, because no team is just going to let you walk on the floor and just hand you a victory. And even though we feel like, and everyone that talks about the Pistons feels like they could be a playoff team and they could get on a run, on the other end, I'm not so sure that this team could not also have a slump that could be prolonged based on the way they play. But and an interesting article that came out where SVG's kind of calling out Andre Drummond and saying that, when he struggles, it's potentially due to a lack of focus. And that's not something you really want to hear from your head coach regarding your marquee superstar who's going to potentially break the bank. A lack of focus. What else is he focusing on? I mean, dude is on the verge of making a boatload of money for a boatload of years. So if you're not focusing game in and game out on being the best teammate, on improving your skills, on doing whatever it takes defensively and offensively to help this Piston team win, that's a concerning sign, and one that was really kind of raised a little bit of a red flag, in that I know he's young, I know he's new to this whole superstar game, and one where he's getting a lot more attention. He's the focal point. He's becoming the face of the team, and you might have to question, is this guy ready to take on that mantle? Now, I'm sure as the season progresses, you're going to see the evolution of Andre Drummond, not only on the court, but also off the court, being a leader. And being a leader doesn't mean just showing up there and getting double-doubles and things like that. It means that you are available, you're in the game, you're focused game in, game out for 82 games. It's relatively, as a professional, easy to get up for the big games. It's easy to show up against teams that are, below 500 and are not that talented. But when you're forced to really push yourself, when you're forced up against tougher competition to step up your game, do you remain focused? Are you able to handle all the distractions outside of the arena and outside of the court? That's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on, because SVG pointed out that sometimes Andre Drummond lacks focus on the court, and hopefully, if you're going to give this guy a max deal, it doesn't continue, because an unfocused Andre Drummond is definitely going to hurt the Detroit Pistons. So the Pistons play versus the Pacers, and the inconsistencies of Andre Drummond. Number 4 story this week in the world of Detroit sports. All right, as I'm recording this, it's halftime, and Matt Prater just kicked a 59-yard field goal, and the Lions are cruising along, winning versus the Chicago Bears in the last game of the season, 10-0. Just based on what I saw in the first half, it doesn't look like the Bears are going to come with all that much in the second half. It may be that the Lions are going to finish the year 7-9, but the number 3 story this week, Martha Ford comes out and says, which is it's kind of an interesting comment because it has double meaning, but she comes out before the Lions-Bears game and says that the Lions front office is leaning towards bringing back head coach Jim Caldwell. I'm trying to pick myself up here after listening to that comment. But then, the last part of that statement that she made today was that in the end, the final decision is going to go to the general manager. When you talk about the Lions, it's just one of those things where you go back and forth. You support the team as a fan. You watch. You really hope that they do what's best for the organization. But several of the fans, myself included, Adam, several people on the network really kind of question what the Lions are doing and what their rationale is. why come out and make that statement when you're coming off a season really in the end that didn't amount to squat? You started off the year 1-7, great. In the second half of the year, your schedule greatly diminished and you didn't play quality teams. You played bad defenses and you handled your business. You didn't quit. Okay, fine. But does that mean that you're willing to bring back Jim Caldwell? Does that mean you're willing to put up with the mistakes that we saw this year? Not having the proper defense on the Hail Mary in the Green Bay game, consistently having, issues on special teams, getting 11 guys on the field, consistently having in-game issues that everybody talks about with head coach Jim Caldwell. Now, you can say he's a great leader and you can say all the nice things that he's able to keep a locker room together, but in the end, when you're talking about the National Football League, you talk about victories. The way that the Lions lost this year was very interesting and very compelling, and it's a mark against head coach Caldwell. You get up to a great start in that first game versus San Diego, and then you go into tank mode offensively, and you don't put away San Diego. You have a chance to get a victory at home versus Green Bay, and you give up a Hail Mary. You have a situation where you didn't put the best coaches in the right positions. Jim Bob Cooter comes out and he looks like he's 25 times better than Lombardi. The offense for the Lions looks smoother. Matthew Stafford looks more comfortable. There's rhythm. They get into games quickly. They score quickly. And it just looks like that Jim Bob Cooter was the right guy to be the offensive coordinator. Yet you brought in Lombardi, and before you fired him, you said this was my guy. Okay, so you have to answer for that. You have to be accountable. If Jim Caldwell wants to preach accountability and he wants to talk about being the leader of this team, why did you have Joe Lombardi be the offensive coordinator when it was obvious that he struggled last year? It was obvious that he wasn't the best for the job. Everyone would see that the offense was predictable. You had opponents coming out and saying that we knew what was coming. And right now, what do you see with the Lions offense? It looks like it's watered down a little bit. It's not all that complicated in terms of what they're running, but they're running it pretty darn effectively. It's nice to see a little bit. Jim Caldwell has to answer for that. And so my honest opinion is that Jim Caldwell needs to go. And it's not for the fact that he did a terrible job. It's not for the fact that he wouldn't have success. When you're going to have a regime change, when you're going to have a new general manager, how can the new general manager come in here, take over this franchise that's starving for success, and then look to the fan base and say, Jim Caldwell's my guy? I don't see a scenario where he can do that. Yeah, continuity is, likely, and continuity is something that has value, and I won't discount that. I do believe that if your ultimate goal is to win the Super Bowl, then it doesn't involve bringing back head coach Caldwell. And now you hear a little bit of rumors that maybe Terrell Austin will interview with the Browns and maybe he'll get another opportunity to be a head coach somewhere else. But I believe the one person you definitely want to keep is Jim Bob Cooter. If Terrell Austin can stay, that'd be great. But there's going to be changes. There has to be changes. I cannot sit here, record this, and tell myself that the Lions are going to maintain the status quo. I think that'd be a slap in the face to the fans. I think it'd be really a 180 turn in terms of what we've seen with Martha Ford. I kind of am hoping, Black Monday is upon us, on Monday, where the majority of NFL head coaches get axed after the season, and the Lions probably aren't going to be part of it because they're going to be actively searching for their next general manager. But I do believe that the Lions will go out and they will find the right general manager who will handle his business and bring in the right coaches and the right system to finally move this thing along. What's your confidence level out there? I'm not sure. Most people say, hey, whatever the Lions do is probably going to be all jacked up anyway. I'm trying to maintain a little bit of hope in that, it's a new regime. They brought in people outside the organization to handle this kind of search. And so that tells me a little bit that they do realize, hey, we're not the best at evaluating talent. We're not the best at finding out who the best candidates are. So Ernie Accorsi's job is to go out and find that person. And I'm crossing my fingers that they're going to go out and find the right guy. So Detroit Lions, number 3 story this week in the world of Detroit sports. Number 2, you settle in on New Year's Eve. A lot of people are talking like, this college football playoff playing their games on New Year's Eve is a joke. The ratings were down. Adam talked about it on the Doc and Jock podcast. Like, are you serious? New Year's Eve? We got plans. We got stuff going on. The ratings were down. And so I settled in. I watched the game, and it went kind of how we thought in the first half. Alabama kept it close with their defense, and Michigan State struggled mightily on offense, and Alabama got out to a 10-0 lead. Michigan State had a great drive towards the end of the half, and Connor Cook made a crucial mistake, and it really cost the team At the time, when you're watching it, you're like, okay, based on history, Connor Cook has made mistakes in the past. He has struggled a little bit, but in the Cotton Bowl, the Michigan State Spartans crapped the bed, and they're the number 2 story this week in the world of Detroit sports. It was very disappointing all around to watch that game because you kind of had a feeling that if Michigan State played a good game, that they would be in it and maybe even win it to advance. But Alabama handled their business, and their defense was stout. They didn't even need the Heisman Trophy winner Henry to play all that well in order to win the game. All the hype, all the talk was about make Coker beat you, make Coker beat you. So what happened in the end? Coker beat you, and Alabama is just supremely talented. And sitting here as a Michigan State supporter, it hurt to see that we weren't in the game. It didn't hurt that we lost. The Sparties were the number 3 seed. Alabama was number 2. It hurt in the fact that you really didn't put forth a performance that was worthy of Michigan State. That's not the performance you want to put on film for everybody to see. Now I'm going to discount all the haters out there that want to talk about, did you deserve to be there, da-da-da-da-da. You played all the games. In the end, you finished the year number 3, and so that entitles you to play in the playoff. So all the rest of the bowl games really are like the NIT. They're like the minor leagues. It's not significant. Those bowl games don't mean a whole heck of a lot. Michigan State had a chance to do some damage in the playoff. And in the end, Alabama was supremely talented, well coached. In every facet of the game, Alabama was 2 steps ahead of Michigan State. And it is a little bit embarrassing that you were shut out, the only college football team in the bowl series this year to get shut out. So it's a tough loss. It hurts, but it doesn't diminish the season. I mean, you get to the playoff, in and of itself. You have to remember, you got there. You had a great season. That was a primary goal. And once you got there versus Alabama, you were going to have to play an A++ game, and you came nowhere close. Partly due to the fact that Alabama's defense was smothering, partly due to the fact that Michigan State struggled to establish their running game on any level. And with that said, if you don't have a running game, if your offense struggles, if you're going to give up big plays on defense, that's the recipe for disaster. There's no chance that Michigan State had to win that game. So we talked about it on the Doc and Jock podcast. Michigan State needed to get out to a lead. I guess in the end, they needed to probably score first, get that momentum. Once Alabama got up to a 10-0 lead, and in the third quarter, after that kickoff touchdown, it just made it that much tougher. And what was a little bit more concerning, and something that you don't see too often from a Mark D'Antonio coach team, is that it looked like towards the end of the third quarter and fourth, they gave up. And that was really kind of disappointing and something that you're not used to seeing. And so going forward, it's going to be tough now for Michigan State. I'm not going to sit here and say that they're done. Every year you say, it's going to be super tough for Michigan State. There's Ohio State, there's Michigan. But Michigan State has had success, and now you look to the future. You're going to have to replace 20 seniors who are leaving, including your 5th-year senior in Connor Cook. So you're going to have to replace some key pieces for Michigan State, and it's no easy task now going forward, which is going to be fun. Michigan State, Ohio State, and Michigan are going to battle, and the best team is going to win. And hopefully Michigan State continues to have their success and continues to put forth solid efforts in terms of bringing in a little bit more talent. Michigan State, in terms of 5-star recruits compared to Alabama, there was no comparison. And Nick Saban, all credit. He did a fabulous job in terms of preparing that team. Alabama's no joke. I really give them a really solid chance of defeating Clemson if they're going to play at that level. If they can play that well defensively and Coker can play another game of his life, forget it. You're going to look at the 5th national title for Nick Saban. But it doesn't discount Michigan State's season. They had a solid season, but they got whooped in the Cotton Bowl, and that's number 2 story this week. So now you've waited. You've listened. I appreciate it. This is the number 1 story on the Detroit Sports Countdown, episode 12. Michigan on New Year's Day 2016 came out and versus a defense that was ranked 5th. Florida's defense was pretty solid all year. They were no joke on the defensive side of the football, but Michigan came through. They were prepared. They had their ducks in a row. Jim Harbaugh is an excellent motivator, and you give him, several weeks to prepare for a squad, and you see what happened. Michigan rolled Florida in a dominating fashion. They played a great game on New Year's Day and really has set off a bunch of Michigan fans to start chirping a little bit to say, hey, now, if this is what he can do in his first year at 10-3, what's he going to be able to do in his second year with more recruits and more highly touted recruits? And I give Michigan fans credit. That's what they want to see. They want to see a dominant bowl victory. But in the end, it's a meaningless game. It doesn't mean all that much. Yes, you want to go out and win the games that you play. It's nice to win bowl games, but now the onus is on Jim Harbaugh to get that team to the playoff and get that team to to get the Wolverine program back to what they're used to. Michigan's used to excellence in football, and that means Big Ten championships. That means having better seasons than even 10-3. Michigan is known as the winningest program in college football, and they're not going to even be satisfied with 9 and 10 win seasons. You need to, first and foremost, you're going to have to establish who the quarterback's going to be, and you're going to have to really go out in the 2016 college football year, and you're going to have to defeat Michigan State and Ohio State. You can't have all these years where you defeat all the cupcakes and you go out and you play your rivals and you don't defeat any of them. The game versus Ohio State was devastating in that you weren't really competitive in that game. Even Brady Hoke was competitive in his first go-round with Ohio State. Michigan is poised to have a really solid 2016 season if you're a fan of that program. You start off with a schedule that isn't that great up front, so you could be looking at a 6-0, 7-0 start based on that schedule, but you're going to have to play some teams, which is good. You're going to play Michigan State on the road, Ohio State, you're going to play Wisconsin, so the entire schedule is not cupcake, but it does shape up early in that schedule for you to have success and things like that. But the Michigan program right now, is really, if you're looking at stocks, you would say that their stock is on the rise. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean because Michigan's stock is on the rise that Michigan State's is declined. Michigan State has heard this before. How are we going to turn around the program? How are you going to replace players that have left? How are you going to replace Kirk Cousins? How are you going to replace Jeremy Langford? You've done that. Now you're going to have to replace them with higher quality talent, I believe. If Michigan State wants to take the ultimate prize, you're going to have to go out there and nationally recruit. Going out there and coaching up these 3- and 4-star guys is great and all, but in the end, talent wins out, and supreme talent will get you to the national title picture, and hoping that Michigan State does that. But for Michigan, they played a great game on New Year's Day. It was nice to see. I mean, they took chances down the field. They made Florida look average, and the running game was there. Jake Rudock was on point. He looked efficient. He ran that offense flawlessly. The game plan was excellent. You now are poised to have one of the best wide receiving tandems out there with Chesson, with Darbo. You're going to have a wide receiver combination in 2016 that could be relatively ranked high. That could be ranked relatively very high and is going to have a lot of success on the offensive side of the football. And now you're bringing in the defensive coordinator, Brown, who had great success last year, who at Boston College put up the number 1 ranked defense in all the country. So with an improved defense, with Jim Harbaugh's magic, oh man, I'm excited for college football. It was really fun college football year. It was fun to watch all the teams handle their business. The bowl games weren't all that great outside of a few. Credit to TCU. They came back and really embarrassed Oregon in that second half in 3 overtimes, getting that victory after trailing 31-0. So all credit to them. That was one of the bowl games that was entertaining to watch. But for the most part, relatively speaking, the bowl games weren't that entertaining. What are you going to do? Again, in 2016, the college football playoff is going to take place on New Year's Eve. They really got to do something about that. I hope that they kind of look to maybe beyond the next couple years change that, because it's not a good time, to sit there and watch, 8 hours of college football on New Year's Eve. I'm not a fan of it. And although I did watch, I'm not one to make a whole bunch of plans. So for me, sitting watching a football game on New Year's Eve is not a big deal, but I can see why people didn't watch it and why the ratings went down. So Michigan is the number 1 story this week in the world of Detroit sports. Their stock is on the rise. They had a dominant performance, and they played a great brand of college football to start off the year, January 1st, 2016. Great things ahead for the Detroit Sports Podcast. I'm enjoying all the other networks that are popping up. It's nice to see that this trend of podcast networks are going out there and handling their business, getting new voices out there, and kudos to all the other networks. And kudos to Kenny and I, who covered the Quick Lane Bowl, had a lot of fun, got a lot of positive reviews, and hopefully we're looking forward to continuing other big things. Again, check out all the shows on the network. All you got to do is go to DetroitSportsPodcast.com. Message us on Twitter at Detroit Podcast. It's the place to be to have a chat about Detroit sports. Large engagement, lots of people follow, and I appreciate all the people who have been voting on the polls. It's a fun time, man. And thank you always to the Detroit Sports Nation who hosts each and every podcast that we put out there. So this has been the 12th edition of the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy it, tell a friend, download it, share it. Help us keep growing. Help us keep having fun and doing these great projects and podcasts on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. This is the Doc, John Macaroon. See everybody next week.